So today I am in New York, well, New Jersey, actually just the other side of the water. But I've just been introduced to my new friend. It's the Sony 400mm f2.8 lens. Now Sony claim this is the world's smallest and lightest 400mm 2.8 lens. It weighs just 2,895 grams. Now that's lighter than Canon and Nikon's 400mm 2.8. And if you throw a 1DX Mark II on there or a Nikon D5 and compare that to the weight of the A9, you're looking at this combination being around about 40% lighter. I'll put the exact numbers up on the screen here. So why is it lighter? Well, for starters, we've got 3 fluorite lenses and they're about here. Now we've got a big front element of glass here. We've got the 3 fluorite lenses in here, and then we've got a nice bit of air in between here, and then more lenses at the back. Now what that means is the balance of this is much more focused around this area of the lens rather than here, and Sony claim this is going to make it much easier to shoot handheld, which is what I'm going to try, because very soon I'm going to go and photograph New York Red Bulls versus FC Dallas. Before I do that, let's quickly run through a few of the other features. So we've got function buttons on the lens just around here as usual. Activate the focus, or the IAF. We've got a big manual focus ring here. And then we've got all of the buttons on here. So we've got AF, manual focus, full-time direct manual focus on or off. We've got 2.7 to 7 meter or 7 meter to infinity, as well as the full range for the focus limiting. Got a function button here. I'm not sure what that does. Going to find out and tell you later. And then obviously steady shot and the various steady shot modes. Oh, and just at the back here, we have a 40.5mm drop-in filter just there. One of the key things that Sony were getting across is because of the linear actuator here rather than kind of a ring one, it is a lot faster. And that means that this lens should be able to focus and keep up with the 20 frames a second burst shooting rate of the A9. But more importantly, it should be able to use IAF whilst doing that. Now for me, if you're photographing sports, that's a complete game changer. You're going to be able to focus on the eye of the athletes, not just, you know, their general face. As well as that, they showed us some MTF charts. This thing looks really impressive. I'm talking, you know, virtually, it should be almost as good in the corners as it is in the center. Now, I don't shoot sports. I do kind of landscape and travel, and it's been a few years since I've shot a sporting event. So let's see what the camera can do. I think the proof will be in the pudding. If a kind of amateur like me in terms of sports photography can pick up the A9 and this camera and get some cracking shots, then, you know, in the arms of a professional photographer, this could be a real game changer, particularly, as I said, that IAF and continuous shooting at 20 frames a second whilst focusing. Anyway, enough talking. I'm going to go and photograph the game, and then we'll talk a little bit about the images and just what I thought of the performance of the lens. I've changed the AF settings a little bit now, so I've got it so that it's not as sensitive, and I've got it on out that 1 to 5 range. I've set it on 1, so it should stay locked on a little bit more. So if somebody runs in front of the player that I'm focusing on, it should stay locked onto the player I'm focusing on rather than jumping. That's the theory anyway.
Performance-wise, the 400mm f2.8 and Sony A9 worked pretty effortlessly. You could fire off a burst of shots, and even at 20 frames a second, they were all pretty much usable, even if the subject was moving erratically within the frame, mainly due to me choosing to handhold the lens. Monopod probably would have been a lot better. Now, hand-holding was possible with the optical stabilisation, but I wouldn't recommend doing it for long periods. The lens and the camera might be lighter than a comparable DSLR, but it's obviously still pretty weighty bit of kit. In terms of sharpness, it's difficult to be conclusive as I was shooting at higher sensitivity settings, but it seems excellent in the centre, and at the edges, it's very impressive. There's a ton of detail there, even at the very edge of the frame. Now, I'm hoping to do some wildlife shooting with the lens, and I'm really looking forward to looking at some of those more finer details. Out of focus areas look absolutely lovely. Look at the nice circular bokeh in this image. Now this was actually taken at 600mm equivalent using the APS-C mode. One thing I didn't get to try when I was using the lens were the 1.4 times and 2 times teleconverters, which turn this lens into a 560mm and an 800mm focal length. And again, I'm hoping that I can test this at some point in the near future.
So I'm back at the hotel room, as you can see, and that was so much fun photographing that game. Red Bulls won 3-0. There was a red card on either side. There was plenty of action going on, and I have a newfound appreciation for sports photographers. That was really hard. I've shot individual sports, things like tennis and dancers and things like that before, but doing a team sport where there's the action's shifting very quickly, there's people running around in front of each other, you have to know the sport. And I was kind of anticipating, because I'm a football fan, so I know kind of roughly where the ball is going to be passed to next, but then you've got to work out the AF settings on the camera, and I feel I've got the kind of tracking and AF speed set up quite nicely. 20 frames a second bursts. I've had players running kind of from the goal mouth straight over to the edge of the pitch and just tracking them, and they're getting larger in the frame, and there's it always gets more difficult the closer the subject gets to the lens. It becomes more difficult for the lens to focus, but this nailed it. So IAF, it worked for the warm-ups where you had a player who was warming up, practicing a skill, the goalkeeper sort of standing on the line then taking a shot. You could use the face detection and it would focus on the goalkeeper's face, and then when you press the button here I was using to activate the IAF, it would focus on that eye, and if the goalkeeper turned his head to one side, the face detection would stay on, and then the second he moved back round and it could see the eye again, it pinged back right onto that. Face detection worked very well. In fact, there was a hoarding, one of the adverts on the side of the pitch had a face on it, and occasionally the lens would actually lock onto that kind of face. Even though it was red, it was recognizing the shape. So on the side here, the other thing I mentioned was this kind of dial, which I didn't really know what it did, but it allows you to preset a focus point. So for example, you might want to preset on the penalty spot from wherever you're standing. You can set that up as a function. So you put it on the preset option here, press the set, and then it locks that focus point. And what you can do then is use this kind of little jog dial ring here, and it will quickly shift to that preset focus point that you've selected. Now the other option here is function, and there's a couple of different functions. This can act actually as a focus, electronic focus. So as you move this to one side or the other, it will focus back and forth really smoothly, and it's kind of sensitive to how far you're pushing it. So if you move it very quickly to the left, that's kind of maximum motor speed. If you move it ever so slightly, then it will just slowly rack sort of back and forth. So a nice one actually for video. Now the other thing it can do is actually you can set it to switch to the APS-C crop mode. So you just do that and it will flick back from the APS-C crop to the normal full frame crop very quickly, and you actually choose that through the firmware. There's an option in the camera to be able to do that, to change what the ring on here does. That's obviously why the A9's had this firmware update. That's one of the features that it obviously controls for this lens. So that's it. That's my sort of bit of a first look review. I can't really call this a full kind of comprehensive review because I'm not a sports photographer. I shoot a bit of wildlife, but for me, football isn't my thing. I'm happy with the images that I took, and I'd be more than happy to use this lens again for sports and wildlife. I think it's excellent image quality, and just the tracking and the AF speed certainly lives up to all the hype that Sony put behind it in their presentation. It's going to be interesting to see how many pros jump on this, because I know a lot of people have been waiting for this lens so that they can fully switch from sort of their Canon or Nikon lenses, particularly those who are using the Canon lenses with the Sigma adapter on their A9 camera. I think they're going to be quite happy with this. Now the price, we're still waiting for UK price, but it's going to be $12,000. It's a lot of money. This isn't going to be a cheap lens at all, but if this is your work, if this is your bread and butter, then it's a long-term investment. You're going to be using it 5-10 years or so, and it's a work lens. This isn't for sort of a hobbyist photographer, you know, certainly not at that price. So that's it. That is the Sony 400mm f2.8 lens. If you've enjoyed this first look video, then make sure you hit the subscribe button to keep up to date with all the latest photo gear news and reviews.